So I think that's what we're looking at is the automation there where it can be more than just a concept. And how do you feel about that? Do you think that the automation is there and maybe we just aren't at the human side yet to implement and actually have a lights out type of environment?
So I hate to use this answer, but I'm going to say it. It depends. Is the automation there? Your first question, Sharon. Yeah, yes and no. What I mean by that is in an R&D lab, can we come up with robotics and automation that can do some of these jobs? Yeah, we're starting to see some of this. Maybe some of the folks who are listening or reading this stuff, will look at like a Boston Dynamics video of the robot dog, but also the walking robot, and it's amazing, right? These robots are doing parkour, right? They're jumping from box to box. They're doing flips. The ones I love, which also kind of scared me, is you see these robots doing all these things, and there's a human there, bashing it with a baseball bat to show that if I knock it down, it comes right back up. And there's a great meme out there that says, these robots aren't going to forget this, so be careful, right, when they do take over the world. So the technology at some level, yes, I think it's there. We've had tremendous advances in robotics and mechanical engineering. We've seen that. We've had tremendous, as you mentioned, advances in things such as camera technology, visual technology, being able to take that data, being able to identify things and objects that are out there. But we're still behind in things such as picking. Why? Because our human hands are still pretty darn good, and they are still a mechanical. I don't want to say miracle because it's nature, but they're still a mechanical. It's amazing, and we haven't been able to truly replicate that in a mechanical robotic world. So there are still some gaps there. But let's just take it for, yes, the advances we've made, what we're seeing from a robotic and mechanical perspective, we're getting very close to being able to handle some of the, if not a lot of the functions we might have in a factory or the warehouse that could then transform into a dark warehouse or factory. Secondarily, though, this is where I think the real question is at what cost? I used to be a big fan of The Simpsons, and I don't know, I'm going to date myself here, but there was a really great Simpsons episode where a car manufacturer asked Homer to design the car of his dream. So it had everything, right? All these cup holders and this type of entertainment system and this and this. And he came up with this beautiful Frankenstein of a car and everything. And the cost was so much that it was impossible to manufacture or to sell. The same thing we have here. It's, on paper, in design and R&D, I can come up with a lot of stuff, but at what cost? And that is, I think, where we're seeing being a chasm between the reality and what we're looking to do. We see this even down to what I would consider a simple automation side to create potentially a part of a dark warehouse is basic things like robots moving inventory around so that someone can pick from it. Well, we've been tackling this for years, maybe even decades now, with Kiva, who's now part of Amazon Robotics, right? They were sort of the first ones to do this. So we have the technology, but why is it not in more warehouses, right? There's some statistics out there that show that there's still only about 15% of the warehouses out there that are automated, meaning they have some heavy degree of automation. So that still leaves the vast majority that doesn't have this type of technology. Yet we've already achieved a certain level when it comes to the cost and the ROI that it would make sense, but the adoption still hasn't caught up. Now I know it's there's always adoption curves, and maybe we're about to hit sort of that inflection point. But it's just to show sort of a cautionary tale that, yes, the technology, what's happening in R&D, what we're coming up with is pretty advanced. We still haven't brought the cost down enough where any factory or warehouse is going to just jump all over this. And then thirdly, I think the change management, the mentality of why do we want to do this, that is also still lagging, right? There's still a lot of evangelizing around this technology that has to be done before we get to a position where, we could probably get a semi-dark warehouse or semi-dark factory or 3/4 dark, but we're not there yet.
Right. Actually, that's a great segue. What change management can you expect with more automation? So if you could speak to that.
It's one of those, Sharon, that it's a very secret, not secret, but it's a very misunderstood and not focused upon issue when it comes to robotics and automation, which is the change management. And again, I by no means profess to be a systems engineer or really dive in, but I can see what I can see, and I've talked to a lot of folks in the space who are warehouse operators, factory operators, and you realize very quickly that there is a certain amount of processes and procedures and shall we even say rituals that happen in these facilities that if you introduce a new technology, especially one that is what I'm going to call visually disruptive as robotics, you're going to inevitably come across some type of change management needs. So for example, if I look back and we introduced WMS software to warehouses and, sequencing software and manufacturing software to manufacturing facilities. And, I've been in this space now for over 20 years. So I've seen it for obviously decades, and introducing software already create a certain amount of change management. Why? Because now the software is more sophisticated. It's going to start telling me how to do the process that I've been doing forever. How do you manufacture, what the pace of it is, how do you store your inventory, things like that. That already caused a ripple. But now but that's software. I don't really see it, right? If I'm working on the assembly line, I interact with software a little bit, but it's not really in my face. In your face change management is all of a sudden there's a robot that pops up on the floor. And now I physically have to understand how to interact with it, right? That's something we sometimes forget, but I literally now physically have something in my workspace that I need to understand how it operates with me, how I operate with it. Is it complementary to me? Does it impact my activity day to day? Does it impact activity that's up and down the process that might impact me in different ways? So this notion of change management, I think any operator of a factory, of a warehouse, has to really think hard about what this will do to his or her facility and what change management has to happen. So I'll give you an example from a warehouse that I spoke with, about a year and a half ago, where, they brought in some automation to, it wasn't dark store type stuff or dark warehouse, but it was automation to the picking module to really allow them to pick at a higher rate. So these robots were going to work with people to then go up and down the aisles and to pick at a much higher rate than they could before. Great. All of a sudden they realized from a change management perspective, it was great for our labor. They were less stressed, able to pick more. But the process where they saw is they actually moved some of the constraints to different parts of the warehouse. So what happened was that induct, right, the beginning process of the picking, they ran out of totes faster. So now labor was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? I'm just standing around. I can't do my job. At takeaway, they were getting too many totes. Why? Because they were picking so much more efficiently that now all these totes were ending up at the takeaway point, and they didn't know how to handle all these totes. And it was creating, to some degree, a lot of strain on that part of the business. So that change management side is how do we, and maybe this is more of a system discussion as well, but how do we take into account that we might optimize one part of our fulfillment, our factory or our warehouse? What's a knock-on effect it has to other parts? And then what is the change management I have to put in place so that my labor and my processes within my facility can still meet their goals, can take advantage of the automation I brought in, but also avoid just passing a constraint somewhere else, and avoid sort of, yes, I'm doing great in this one section, but overall, people at my warehouses are pissed because things aren't going right and it's trickling down. So this notion, and this is both from a people personnel perspective, but also from a process and a flow perspective, I think something that has to be taken into consideration, because you have a system that is chugging along, whether it's great or not, it's doing its job. And all of a sudden now you're introducing some, what I would consider some visual, disruption in there, because you're putting in a physical machine, a robot, to do something. So that's what I would caution folks. And it doesn't mean that people shouldn't look towards potentially bringing more automation into their facility, but they just need to take that into consideration, right? It's not just bring robot in, solve problem X, increase efficiency by Y. Great, done. It's what happens across the whole system.
Yeah, sure. There's a domino effect. You start at point A and hey, you're rolling along, and all of a sudden then you have the stop in the in the production, in the whole supply chain. Really, it just depends on where that automation has come into play. So it is probably more something that everybody needs to look at from the very beginning of that line all the way through the whole supply chain process.